Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya English. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, we'll be getting all the latest from Gaza, where health authorities are reporting that 69 people have been killed in the last 24 hours, including 6 journalists. The Israeli army admits to killing journalist Anas al-Sharif in an airstrike on Gaza City on Monday, accusing him of leading a Hamas cell. Coming up, we'll have the latest on that, plus the overall situation on the ground there in Gaza. Hello and welcome to the programme. Palestinians have been reporting one of the heaviest bombardments in weeks overnight in areas of eastern Gaza City, where witnesses say that Israeli tanks and planes pounded Sabra, Zaytun and Shujaiya. These are 3 eastern suburbs of Gaza City. Well, this comes just hours after the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he expected to expand the offensive in the enclave. Well, the Israeli military says its forces fired artillery at Hamas militants in the area. Meanwhile, the war in Gaza has been described as one of the deadliest conflicts in history for journalists, with more than 200 media workers reported to have been killed since the conflict began. Meanwhile, the UN Human Rights Office has condemned Israel for its overnight strike on a tent sheltering Palestinian journalists, calling it, quote, a grave breach of international humanitarian law. Well, the UN statement underscores growing international outrage over what many see as Israel's systematic targeting of the press in Gaza. Well, let's get more on this now. We can speak to the photojournalist Paul Conroy, who's covered multiple conflicts and who in 2012 was in the Syrian city of Homs with the Sunday Times foreign correspondent Mary Colvin when she was killed in a rocket attack, and Paul himself was severely injured in that same attack. He joins us from the edge of the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Paul, thank you very much for joining us. I want to start by asking you about the killing of Anas al-Sharif, the 28-year-old Al Jazeera correspondent, killed with a group of 5 of them from Al Jazeera were killed. 1 other freelance journalist was also killed. What went through your mind when you heard that news?
Thanks for having us on. First of all, condolences to the family, friends and colleagues of those killed in this ruthless attack. When I first heard it, I was stunned, shocked, dismayed. This is really nothing short of an assassination and execution of journalists who were protected under the Geneva Convention to go about their work without being targeted. And it's symptomatic of what's happened in Gaza over the last 2 years. There have been case after case of the Israeli government attacking journalists, which under no circumstances is legal. This is a clear breach of international law. These are war crimes that are being committed, and it breaks my heart. These are fellow journalists. These are colleagues, and we keep seeing this kind of behavior. And I mean, there's no sense of any accountability from the Israeli government. And this is just another in a lineup, I think, of nearly 200 people, 200 journalists killed for simply doing their job, for bearing witness. And I mean, these people like to work in the dark. They don't like the light being shined into them. And these brave, extremely brave journalists are being killed for holding these people to some degree of account.
I mean, Israel says Anas al-Sharif was the head of a Hamas terrorist cell. I mean, does that sound feasible to you? Have you seen or heard any evidence that sounds remotely convincing to you?
Absolutely nothing. I mean, we keep hearing this. The Israelis target people, kill them, then always seem to have a convenient story to hand. They're blatantly targeting people who were protected under the Geneva Convention. There is no evidence. I think if we look at the world's reaction to what Israel is doing at the moment, I don't think many people believe these tales that they come out with of journalists being terrorists. It's not believable.
I mean, even if there was some evidence of some past Hamas links, and there are various reports doing the rounds, I mean, the same cannot be said, can it, of the other 4 Al Jazeera journalists who are with him and the 1 freelancer. So it's almost as if to say, well, if we suspect 1, 5 other people are going to pay the price. I mean, that doesn't stack up either, does it?
No, absolutely not. They are acting as judge, jury, and executioner with no evidence being presented anywhere. And five other people in a tent of all places. They're bombing tents. Now, them five people have been named. We know who they are, but the Israeli government presented no evidence that they were guilty of anything. And if you prosecute a war using only wide area battlefield weapons in highly populated areas, you are going to kill people. That let there be no people be under no illusion that this was an accidental killing of five other people. It was probably something, I don't know the munition, but if you use a Hellfire missile against a tent in a crowded area, other people are going to die, and that is without doubt. That is not an accident. That is just pure disregard for everybody on the ground in that 30-40 meter location is condemned before the missile is fired.
There aren't many journalists working on the ground now in Gaza. I mean, as we've been saying, so many have been killed. Another 6 have been killed in the last 24 hours, one of them, Anas al-Sharif. When organizations like the Committee to Protect Journalists say that he should have been protected back in July, what sorts of measures do you think they had in mind? I mean, how can the remaining journalists operational in Gaza be given more protection? What form could that protection take?
It's very difficult. When you have as Israel does, is control all access to Gaza. Nobody gets in or out. And these are young Palestinian journalists who just have no protection. I don't see. They won't allow international journalists in as witnesses. So the young journalists are operating in an environment where the only authority in that place, in that 140 square miles, that is the hell of Gaza, the only people there bearing witness are the young journalists. So it's not even as if the eyes of the world can be there to witness this. We can't be there, the BBC, yourselves, we can't be there to bear witness. So unfortunately, it puts the brave individuals who have the courage to document what's happening in this.
Yeah, I mean,
in this place, they're wide open. They are at the mercy of the Israeli government, and that is not a good place to be.
Sure. And as you've been saying, international journalists are not given free access to Gaza unless they go as part of a military embedded invitation. And what does it say, do you think, the fact that Israel is not allowing international journalists into Gaza? What does that say to you?
The most obvious thing is they have a lot to hide. They're acting in the same way that when I went into Syria in 2012, there's no difference. What they're doing there is they're killing the messengers. They do not want the world to know what's going on in Gaza. Hence, the international journalists not being allowed in without almost an embed. And that's only indicative of what we witnessed in Syria when we were in Bab al-Amra and Homs, was the regime slaughtering people, pure and simple. We saw it, we witnessed it, we got the word out, we were attacked and killed. And I think it's exactly the same playbook that Israel is using. But this is Israel. When we were there, it was the regime of Bashar al-Assad, who were completely off the rails and rogue. This is until recently a well-respected country, and they are operating by the same playbook as despots such as the al-Assad family, and that is tragic.
What you're saying, just to clarify, is that the tactics being used by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel are the same or comparable as the tactics used by the ousted Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Is that basically it?
That's exactly what I'm saying. That the playbook is the same. It's killing the messenger. We weren't meant to be in Syria getting the stories out that we got out, and the same way they despise the fact that these brave young journalists are standing up and getting the word out, and it boils down to the same thing: kill the messenger at source. The only way they can stop the stories getting out that they don't want to get out, and there are a lot of stories they don't want to get out, is to kill the messenger. And when we see a state such as Israel fall back on the tactics of a very essentially a rogue nation such as the Assad regime, that's an appalling state of affairs.
And of course, they are accusing of Anas al-Sharif of having been a Hamas operative. Do you think this sets a worrying precedent that other countries could use in the future and say that, ex-journalist covering Y conflict isn't actually a journalist, they're a member of some foreign intelligence organization or some foreign terrorist organization, is therefore a legitimate target? I mean, has that Pandora's box now been opened, do you think?
I think it has been opened, and there's that aspect to it, and the great danger is if Israel is seen to get away with this, then it's almost countries can do that and then turn around and use and point to Israel and say, well, Israel did it and there was no international outrage, there was no call for justice and accountability. So you got two things. Yes, other people may well and probably will use this. They were part of an insurgency, a terrorist group, and use it. But then also, if Israel is not held accountable, then they can point to Israel and say, well, they did it and got away with it. So it sets a precedent.
Sure.
Unless they're held accountable, if they get away with this and they're not held accountable, then for years to come, journalists' lives will be in danger when you get regimes pulling the same stunt and then pointing to the fact that it was okay when Israel did it, they got away with it. That is going down a very, very dark path indeed.
And just lastly, Paul, and briefly, if you will, I mean, you've covered lots of conflicts around the world. You've been very much on the front line and very much in harm's way on occasion doing your job as a reporter and a photojournalist. How do you think history is going to judge Israel for its actions in Gaza?
I mean, I think a lot of Israelis do understand the damage this is doing to Israel's standing in the world. But I think in general, the world will be damning, and this will put back the Israeli cause. When the dust settles and people look at the sheer outrages that have been committed in Gaza, the world will judge Israel very harshly. And I think it's essentially one man, Netanyahu, in his quest for political survival, has taken a whole country to the edge of a pariah state, and I think they Israelis will live to regret the day that this was allowed to happen.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Photojournalist Paul Conroy, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thanks a lot. Cheers, man.
For more, I'm joined now from Tel Aviv by Brigadier General Mir Elran, who's a former IDF Deputy Director of Military Intelligence. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Lots to talk about, but I wanted to start by asking you about the 6 journalists who were killed in the Israeli airstrike overnight. The UN Human Rights Agency calling this a grave breach of international humanitarian law. What do you say to that?
Well, I think it's a very unfortunate incident, of course. I'm not familiar with all the details, what happened there, but you have to remember, and the audience have to understand that this is the war zone, very active, and things are happening, unfortunately. And I'm sure that they were not killed, intentionally. But again, I only can say that I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, I mean, Israel says he was, this individual, Anas al-Sharif, who was 28 years old, was targeted intentionally. They say he was a terrorist affiliated with Hamas. I'm just wondering whether you'd seen or heard anything that sounded to you like conclusive evidence that that was indeed the case.
Unfortunately, I don't have any conclusive evidence for the case, for this particular case. I'm quite confident that if there was any intention behind that, it was because he was incriminated as being a terrorist in And if that's the case, of course, it changes the situation totally. So we'll have to wait a little bit and find out or hear more about what happened there. Again, I think that if they're talking about innocent people in general, and particularly media people, correspondents and foreign correspondents, so even local correspondents, then it's very unfortunate and unwarranted.
It's extremely unfortunate. I mean, it's horrific when you consider what organizations like the UN and Reporters Without Borders are saying. Around 200 of my colleagues, journalists, have been killed in the war so far. And of course, international journalists can't go into Gaza and report freely there unless they go on a tightly controlled military trip. I mean, it seems to the outside world that Israel doesn't want this war to be covered. Why do you think that is?
Well, I'm not sure that it's true that Israel doesn't want it to be covered. It is covered occasionally, of course. What the IDF is saying about that is that it's, as I said before, an active and quite dangerous war zone where there are military activities and terrorist activities, and I think it's dangerous to be there. And I understand the need and the wish of correspondents from all over the world to come to Gaza, but we don't want to have them, harmed in any way. So the best way that Israel thinks that it is appropriate is to limit the entrance of foreign correspondents to the Gaza Strip. Of course, we unfortunately we pay the price for that because people who are not able to get in necessarily would have a biased idea against what Israel is doing and what are the consequences of what Israel is doing. And there is a dilemma here. There is no doubt about that. I agree with you if this is what you suggest. And I hope that the circumstances will be sometime in the future that people will be able to get there, at least gradually or in some limited numbers, and providing that their lives will not be jeopardized.
Yeah, I mean, in any war situation, it's usually up to the journalists and the organization they work for as to whether or not they will be deployed. So in this case, it's not really up to Israel, it's up to journalists if they want to cover the war. And some of them have gone, and as we've been saying, 200 have been killed. We've just spoken to a photojournalist who's covered lots of wars around the world. Clearly, he can't go there. He seemed to think perhaps the reason for not allowing journalists in was because Israel has something to hide. What do you say to that?
Well, again, I understand the need and the wish of correspondents to get into Gaza. And what happens is that mostly when the area is being covered by journalists, it's mostly, I think, to a large extent, by local correspondents who are being associated with the different channels. And unfortunately, sometimes they take a risk that is dangerous for us, for them. And again, all I can say is that this is a problem, this is a dilemma. I think that in an ideal situation, which is not the case right now in Gaza, of course, we should enable people to get in and to cover the scene and to see what's happening and to make their own judgment. I do not have any problem with that. But unfortunately, this is a dangerous situation. This is a dangerous place. And this is the policy of the IDF spokesman as of now. And we have to accept it as it is.
Yeah, and we're talking at the moment of an average of 8 or 9 journalists being killed every single month there in these last 22 months of violence in Gaza, which I think makes it the deadliest conflict on record for journalists. I mean, as an Israeli, how does that make you feel?
Well, first of all, I can't argue about the numbers, about the statistics. I'm not familiar with that. And I take it that what you say is the correct numbers. That's one thing. Unfortunately, I think that we had to understand, and again, I'm talking about our audience that has to understand that this particular war that lasts already for almost 2 years is a very different kind of a war that, military establishments, military organizations have been confronting. And this is why, by the way, it's such a difficult kind of a challenge for Israel. And the problem is how to, on one hand, accomplish the goals of the war that the government of Israel has been setting for the military, which is, of course, a directive. And on the other hand, to minimize the cost to civilians in general, to local Gazans in particular, and of course also to the journalists. I mean, we have to understand that this is a very, very difficult, challenging kind of a conflict, totally different. And if we want to accomplish anything in Gaza, and you know how difficult it is, the fact of the matter is it takes us a long period of time. The reason for that, it takes us such a long time, is the challenges of the terrain, the challenges of guerrilla warfare that has not been seen in any other conflict in previous occasions. So I don't think that there is a good basis for comparison here. And again, I think that this whole story of casualties is a very, very serious one. There is no doubt about it. But we have to understand that, unfortunately, when Hamas started the war, as Hamas continues with the war, and as Hamas is not willing to come to any kind of a compromise over the kidnapped hostages, and is refusing to conduct any kind of a dialogue to end the war, then they have a major responsibility for what's happening in Gaza, especially since they started this war in a brutal manner on October 7th, almost 2 years ago. And again, all that I can say is that it is unfortunate, and I wish, and this is, I think, the only really good solution for the end of the agony there and the horrific things that are happening there, is to stop the war, to stop it now, and start negotiations, first of all, concerning the fate of the kidnapped hostages, and then, of course, to expand the negotiations with the mediators and with the other possible partners to solve the problem of Gaza, which is a very important thing for us and also for the Palestinians in Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about ending the war, but Prime Minister Netanyahu is talking about expanding the war in Gaza. That's his latest announcement. I mean, what's your understanding of what he's got in mind for the next phase of the conflict?
Well, I don't know what he has in mind, but I can tell you that my interpretation of what he is saying right now is to change the deadlock situation that is presently taking place in Gaza. This is very unfortunate for us. As I said before, I think we need to end the war. And Hamas is not enabling us to conduct the dialogue and the negotiations through the mediators as we wish. And I think that the best way to read what Netanyahu is saying right now is watch it. If you do not succumb to our demands, if you do not come back to the negotiation table, and if you resist any kind of a compromise on the different issues, then we will do this and this and that. And you have to remember that I think that Netanyahu was quite cautious about what he's going to say. He didn't say that it's going to happen now. It said that it's going to happen with the time. And I think that it's quite clear that Israel is willing to go back to the table of negotiations and to bring about some kind of a arrangement over Gaza on the different issues that are still, to a large extent, unfortunately, still outstanding.
Yeah, I mean, Israel's allies are increasingly alarmed, not least by this latest expansion plan that's been announced by Prime Minister Netanyahu. Australia, the latest country in a long list, saying it's going to recognize a Palestinian state, Germany suspending weapons shipments, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund taking action as well. I mean, are you concerned that lasting damage has been done to some decades-old relationships with what were, let's face it, key allies of Israel?
Well, first of all, I don't like it. Of course, I think that this is not really the right policy for the Western countries to take as far as Israel is concerned. I think that the idea of recognizing the Palestinian state is not something that really upsets me too much. I think that this would be sometime the one of the parts or the components of the solution over the Middle East. The most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, is how it is being done. And I think that the best thing to bring about this two-state solution to the Middle East is by negotiation between Israel and the Palestinian representations. Of course, not Hamas, which is out of the picture and will be out of the picture indefinitely, but there are other true representatives of the Palestinian people. And I think that if we can bring about the end to the war in Gaza, which is, as I said before, the most important thing right now, then, of course, we can also discuss eventually or sometime in the future, we can also discuss different kinds of arrangements between Israel and the Palestinian people. I think that it will happen sometime, but it needs to be based on a dialogue between the two sides. It needs to be based on an agreement that there is no imposition here, and this is a problem for the Palestinians and for the Israelis to settle between themselves. And if that happens, it will be durable, it will be sustainable, and hopefully it will also be stable in the future. And I still hope and think that there is a possibility that it will actually happen. Right now, of course, Hamas is a major spoiler in this respect, and I'm not sure. I think that the different declarations of the Western leaders are more hindering this kind of an eventuality than helping it. But of course, we'll have to wait and see what happens. Same thing about Germany. I think that Germany still is, to a large extent, one of our best allies and supporters. And I'm not very concerned as of now about the practicalities of the German statement about an embargo. I think that they're talking about very limited embargo, and they are trying to make a point. I think that this is something that has to be understood in this manner.
Shouldn't Israel listen to its allies?
Pardon?
Shouldn't Israel listen to its allies?
I think that Israel is listening to it very, very carefully. I don't think that it's something that we can and should ignore. And we are conducting through our emissaries a very, very close and honest dialogue about the different issues, including the Gaza situation. And I think that this is the way to conduct a dialogue with friends and with allies. And I still think that Israel is being a very, very strong and important part of the Western world, and that we are still, to a large extent, aligned with the Western world, with its policies on different issues. And I think that we will find a way to go forward also on the issues of the Gaza Strip.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time today, Brigadier General Meir Elran. Thank you for your time. Well, let's get more now on the humanitarian situation in Gaza, as well as the other main developments there. We can speak to Shayna Lowe, who is a spokesperson for the Norwegian Refugee Council, who joins us from the Jordanian capital, Amman. Thank you so much for joining us, Shayna. Always a pleasure talking to you. I just want to start by talking to you about the killing, I should say, of Anas al-Sharif and the other 5 journalists who were killed with him. What's your reaction to that news?
Well, we've seen far too many journalists, humanitarians, frontline workers be killed. And in this case, we know that the Israelis made it quite clear that it was a targeted killing. Journalists, like all other civilians, must be protected. They should not be targeted. And we've seen just the tremendous work that journalists have been doing as a whole in Gaza to get out the story when no international journalists have been permitted in unless part of embeds with the Israeli military. And so this is yet another group of individuals who are focused on getting the story out from Gaza, who we no longer will have the opportunity to hear from.
Yeah, I mean, there's very few journalists still operating in Gaza. And, it's being reported that close to 200 journalists have been killed since October the 7th, 2023. According to Al Jazeera, they said he was, quote, one of the last remaining voices in Gaza, conveying the tragic reality to the world. I mean, who's going to convey that reality now?
I think we're continuing to see not only the work of incredible journalists, but also the work of ordinary citizens. They are live streaming their daily life. My own social media feeds are filled with images of people telling their story, amplifying the story of what's happening to people in Gaza. But it's clear that there are efforts being made to silence those who are speaking out about what they are seeing, whether that is by physical targeting or intimidation. And so this is a growing concern, of course, that we've seen over the last 22 months, where there's been shrinking space for anyone trying to amplify what indeed is happening on the ground in Gaza.
Yeah, we've heard from the UN Special Rapporteur Irene Khan, who says that the claims made against him that he was some kind of a Hamas operative are unsubstantiated. I mean, it's not the first time, is it, that it's basically Israel's version of events versus pretty much the rest of the world?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen multiple times allegations against individuals, whether they're journalists, whether they're humanitarians, that whether it's about the diversion of aid, that have proven to be unfounded. But what we're facing now is not only the physical targeting of people and infrastructure in Gaza, but also a battle of narrative, a battle of what's going on. And so we're seeing that there's constant efforts to delegitimize stories coming out of Gaza, to discredit the voices of people who are bearing witness to the atrocities that are taking place there. And it just, I think, reinforces the importance of having not only journalists be protected, but aid workers who are sharing their experiences, the ability for foreign journalists to finally be granted unfettered access to Gaza to be able to report on what's going on inside. There is an effort to silence what is happening there, and journalists and others need to make sure that the story is continuing to get out.
Yeah, and we certainly are keeping a very close eye on developments, and we have done ever since we first went on air. I mean, I know you're a humanitarian, so let's talk about the humanitarian situation on the ground now. I mean, just give us an update, because it's been a while since we last spoke to you. What is your understanding of what the reality on the ground is like there in Gaza for ordinary people right now?
It feels like every time I speak to you or I speak to a journalist, I'm saying the situation is the worst that it's ever been. And it just continues to reach points that we didn't know were possible. And so we continue to have reports coming out of Gaza every day of individuals dying from malnutrition. We've had over 200 people be pronounced dead, including over 100 children who have died of malnutrition in the last 22 months, and most of those have happened in the last 6 weeks. And this is due to intentional policies that are of starvation, of deprivation, where Israel has continued to restrict the amount of aid entering, the type of aid entering, who can bring in that aid, who can deliver that aid, whether or not we as humanitarians have access to reach that aid once it enters Gaza and safely deliver it to populations throughout. So we continue to hear and see that our colleagues on the ground and ordinary people are starving. They are searching for food. Food is the number one priority. It's all they can think about. It controls their days, thinking about where am I going to get my next meal? What am I going to feed my family? We've also seen in the last few days, as some commercial trucks have entered, a slight improvement where some foods that were not available on the market for 5 months since Israel imposed the near total siege on Gaza on March 2nd, things that hadn't been seen since then in over 5 months, were now starting to reemerge on the markets, things like cheese, sugar, tea. But just because there's slightly more available on the market does not mean that the starvation crisis is being adequately addressed. People are still going days without eating. People still aren't getting enough calories. They aren't getting enough variety in their diet. They aren't getting the nutrition that they need because they continue to be mostly reliant on bread, rice, lentils, and other legumes. And so we continue to, and then on top of all of this, as the starvation crisis continues to mount, every day we continue to hear reports of Palestinians seeking aid or food from GHF distribution sites, or trying to go and reach UN convoys that may be entering Gaza and being killed by Israeli forces while seeking out food. It's completely unacceptable. It's shocking to think about that people who are doing nothing more than trying to feed their families and survive are risking their lives trying to get food. No one should be forced to make that calculation of whether it's better or safer to stay at home and risk dying of starvation, or go and risk getting shot for a pack of lentils.
Right, and one of the things we've heard on countless occasions when interviewing Israeli officials is that one of the reasons for restricting the entry of food aid into Gaza is they don't want it falling into the hands of Hamas. But supposing Hamas did steal some food aid, I mean, I really not ever managed to understand this argument put forward by Israel. Why would that be such an issue anyway, if Hamas steals a bit of food aid? That's no justification. I mean, how do you justify? I'm just wondering what your thoughts are when you hear Israeli officials saying that. I mean, how do you think they're justifying not allowing food in on the grounds that Hamas might take some?
Well, I think that it's, in some ways, it's an irrelevant point, because there have been multiple reports. The U.S. government, the USAID, had a report that was reported on several weeks ago saying that there was no widespread aid diversion. The New York Times reported that senior Israeli military officials said that there was no widespread aid diversion by Hamas. Most of the aid that has been stolen by armed groups are criminal gangs, not parties to the conflict, but rather criminal gangs that are known to be collaborating with Israel, cooperating with Israel, operating in areas where Israel has complete military control. But still, regardless, nothing justifies starving an entire population to punish an actor in a conflict. I mean, it's not that in international humanitarian law, there has to be not only military necessity, but also proportionality. And there is nothing proportionate about starving 2.1 million people to force your enemy to surrender. These are innocent civilians that have a right to receive aid. And Israel, as the occupying power, has obligations to provide for the population in Gaza, to provide for their basic necessities. And that means either providing the food directly or facilitating the entry of humanitarian aid that can be delivered impartially. And what we've seen over the last 22 months is obstacle after obstacle, restriction after restriction, preventing us from being able to bring in aid efficiently and access areas throughout Gaza to feed people.
Right, you could almost argue as well that if you actually allowed that aid in the sort of quantities that it's been donated in, it's not Israel's aid to give in the first place, much of it came from other countries, you would undermine that tool that Hamas could potentially use of weaponizing food and selling it back to people because they wouldn't need to buy it back. There'd be plenty of it. So, as we've been saying, it doesn't make any sense, does it, as an argument for restricting the entry of aid into Gaza. But let's just move on, because I want to ask you a bit about, how after these 22 months of warfare in Gaza and the terrible violence that we've seen there, Prime Minister Netanyahu is planning to expand this conflict and launch a new offensive to dismantle Hamas. I mean, what would that mean from a humanitarian point of view?
Nothing good will come of this planned operation to expand military operations in Gaza City, perhaps in the refugee camps in the center of the Gaza Strip. Right now, about 50% of Gaza's population, an estimated 1 million or so Palestinians, are seeking shelter or residing in Gaza City. To force those people to move is unconscionable. These are people who are starving, literally. When I spoke to my colleague Selma last week in Gaza City and asked her how people were reacting, and this was before the proposal had been voted on by the Israeli cabinet. It was on Thursday. And that's when she told me that, some food that hadn't been available on the markets arrived. And that's all people in Gaza are focused on right now in Gaza City. They are celebrating the holiday of cheese and sugar. That's what she said. And I think it's really demonstrative of the level of deprivation that we've seen in Gaza, where people are so hungry, so deprived of food that they are not thinking about the displacement or the attacks that will happen next week or even the next day. They are focused on thinking about where they are going to get their next meal. We know that a large-scale military operation, any military operation for that matter, is going to lead to increased killings, not just people who die in hostilities, but people who are weakened by malnutrition, unable to travel, unable to move. The amount of disease that is spreading in Gaza due to the lack of hygiene and hygiene materials and sanitation will lead to increased suffering and death. We know that there's no space left in Gaza for people. Already, we have people crowded into 3 tiny enclaves, making up less than 15% of Gaza. And so the idea, where are these people expected to go? Any evacuation would require them not only to have safe passage, not only to have guarantees that they'd be able to return home once hostilities have ended, but the very basics that the things necessary to sustain human life will be provided for them. And over the last 22 months, as we've seen displacement order after displacement order, Palestinians have not been granted anything that would allow for a lawful evacuation. These are forcible transfers, and which is a violation of international law. And what we anticipate is if this moves forward, we could see up to 1 million people forcibly transferred, many of them not for the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, even 10th time. And then, of course, there's the concern that if there is no space in Gaza, that these Palestinians could be pushed out and effectively deported out of Gaza, which would also be a grave violation of international law.
Is that something you think is likely? I mean, just to sort of wrap up this conversation, I mean, what do you think Israel's plans for Gaza actually are? Does Israel have a plan?
That's a question for an analyst who works who studies Israeli politics. But it certainly seems like the possibility of Palestinians being forced out of Gaza That's something we've been seeing members of the Israeli government talk about since October of 2023, within days of October 7th. We've seen members of the Israeli cabinet who have extreme influence over Prime Minister Netanyahu speak openly about this not being a temporary occupation or temporary military presence, since Israel already has been occupying Gaza for nearly 60 years. But who talk openly about wanting to resettle Gaza, to bring Israeli civilians in and create new settlements or rebuild the settlements that were removed in 2005. Again, grave violation of international humanitarian law. So I think that anything is possible, but what we desperately need at this point is the international community to push and apply as much pressure however they can to bring the parties to come to a permanent ceasefire agreement, one that is sustained, that protects civilian lives, that ensures that hostages are returned back to Israel, and for the opening of all of the crossings into Gaza and a massive scaling up of aid so that we as humanitarians can do our jobs without restrictions and go and save lives.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us and really appreciate your efforts on the ground as well. Shana Lowe, spokesperson for the Norwegian Refugee Council. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Well, joining us now, we can cross to Birmingham in the United Kingdom and speak to the Palestinian academic and Professor Kamel Hawwash. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Professor. I just want to start by talking to you about the death of Anas al-Sharif, the other Al Jazeera journalists and the other freelance journalists who were all killed there in Gaza in overnight attacks. I mean, what's your reaction? What went through your mind when you heard that news?
First of all, I was watching Al Jazeera actually when this happened, so I saw the breaking news as it happened, and the initial images were not sort of blocked over, so unfortunately we could see all the gory details, and it was horrendous. Every day I think Israel can't sink any lower, but it does. In this particular case, murdering these journalists in a tent, they knew exactly where it was. They had gone about warning Anas that he was a target for them, and they did it. They killed him. Another voice that sends out the truth. What we see is where he is and what people are saying, not sort of propaganda as we get from the Israeli side. So it was, first of all, a shock, though we stop being shocked by what Israel does. It can do anything. A really heavy heart feeling for his family, who have lost him as their breadwinner, as their father, as a husband, and so on. And of course, to Muhammad, the other journalist, and the cameraman. What Israel does on a day-to-day basis proves the point I've been making, that it is the most criminal state in the 21st century.
Professor, before we crossed to you, we were speaking to a photojournalist who was with Mary Colvin when she was killed in Homs in Syria back in 2012. And he said, he was the one who drew this parallel between this attempt by the Israeli government to muffle the international media and block access by the the international media. He compared that technique to the techniques to silence the press that were used by the ousted Syrian president Bashar al-Assad. What do you make of that comparison?
Look, Israel's crimes don't need to be compared with anyone else's crimes. They are absolutely horrific in their own ways, in their own terms. I mean, the outright starvation of the people of Gaza, but then claiming that Israel is not starving Gaza, as Netanyahu did only yesterday, hours before he ordered or was aware of the assassination process of Anas al-Sharif, shows you that, look, Germany, in my view, was the most criminal state of the 20th century. Israel is the most criminal state of this century, and it is pushing itself into total isolation. It is around the world people hate what it does. They don't hate the Israeli people per se, but we must realize and remember that the IDF comes from the Israeli people. The Air Force comes from the Israeli people. The person operating that drone that killed these people comes from the Israeli people. So it's becoming more and more difficult to disassociate them from this absolutely far-right extremist government. So I'll just say, you don't need to compare what it does with anyone else. It should be up before the courts around the world, not just when its people go to countries, not just the International Criminal Court. And there's absolutely no excuse for countries not arresting Benjamin Netanyahu when he tries to come to them. And, this shows you how the United States, by allowing him to come and visit a couple of times since the arrest warrant was issued, is just simply wrong. You either have international law and you apply it uniformly, or we have the law of the jungle, which is Israel's law.
Yeah, I mean, this is clearly a major issue and a major dilemma for a lot of Israel's traditional allies. I mean, up until this point, the United States has been pretty resolute in its support of Israel, but we're starting to see cracks emerging when it comes to other traditional allies. Just recently, the British Prime Minister, you're in the UK, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer saying he's gravely concerned, particularly about, he said, the repeated targeting of journalists in Gaza. I mean, how divisive an issue has this become in the UK? Because we're seeing a lot of pictures from outside the UK of large-scale protests and considerable tension.
Yes, I was at the 29th protest on Saturday in London, where it is estimated that 300,000 people came out. I repeat, 29th protest for one particular cause. People see what's happening, and it is thanks to people like Anas and Muhammad that feed us with the pictures to see what's happening in real life. And there's so first of all, the government, including Starmer is a pro-Israeli prime minister. Let's be clear. And even Lamy, he might talk the talk, but he doesn't walk the walk. Why doesn't he summon the Israeli ambassador and tell her that unless Israel stops what it's doing, no words of condemnation will come after that. She will be expelled and ties with Israel would be cut. Surely, if you are looking at a situation where major war crimes are being committed, a genocide is being acted out, you cannot have relations with a country which does that. You should be sanctioning them. And in addition to that, Israel should have no weapons coming from the UK. This business of the F-35 parts that we still supply here from the UK, that it goes to a pool. Well, stop supplying it to the pool. Let everyone suffer until Israel stops dropping bombs onto the Palestinians. So I think the UK has not done enough. It should not call Israel an ally while it continues to practice what it does, which is crimes that are absolutely horrendous. And they should listen a lot more to the doctors that come back. Even now, as we speak, there are doctors there who are feeding us the first-hand account of the crimes that Israel is committing. They do not mince their words. They aren't able to operate on the people who come to them. The numbers, the medical need, the medical equipment, and even people needing dialysis are being starved of that particular treatment, and they will die. So Israel is carrying out a genocide. And I always say to the people who say, oh, no, it isn't a genocide. When they murder a whole family and it is erased from the register, that family has been genocided. When they repeat it on other family, that is genocide of the people.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken to some of the doctors that you mentioned there, and sure enough, their testimony is horrific, and they're very credible witnesses. I mean, very hard to dispute what doctors say because we tend to trust our doctors. But I want to ask you about the longer-term consequences of Western leaders giving this sort of tacit support, as you seem to be describing it, of Israel. I mean, could there be broader consequences for their actions from a legal standpoint? Could they be accused later on down the line of complicity in those crimes?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I hear that lawyers believe that there is complicity, that particularly in the UK, the lack of action could land, particularly David Lammy and Keir Starmer facing accusations of complicity, of war crimes, and so on. They will come at some point. It's difficult to know when, but I think that, plus the pressure from the people, plus the pressure for the MPs, is what brought about the sort of mealy-mouthed issue about recognizing Palestine if Israel doesn't adhere to certain conditions. So there's been a shift. Why didn't Keir Starmer come out and say, when he did, I recognize the UK recognizing Palestine, and it will work to ensure that there's an end to the occupation and that state is established. Instead, he linked it with conditions that Israel is not going to stop its attack on the Palestinians, and therefore, or its expansion of settlements in the West Bank, which means that in September, is Keir Starmer going to come back to the British people and say, well, I set some conditions, they weren't met, so I can't recognize Palestine? These two issues should be detached from each other. And he should not be using the recognition of Palestine as a state as punishment for Israel. There should be a complete detachment between recognition and the issue of sanctions on Israel until it stops the killings that it continues to perform on a daily and hourly and minute-by-minute basis.
And yet, Professor, I mean, despite the international pressure, the protests that you mentioned, the horrific testimony, I mean, Israel seems to be intent on taking the conflict in Gaza to the next level. And we're hearing plans to expand the military operation in Gaza. They come from Prime Minister Netanyahu. And what's your understanding of what he's got in mind there?
The ultimate aim is to drive the Palestinians out of Gaza and then to move on to the West Bank. And I have no doubt even the Palestinian citizens of Israel will become under attack, because what Zionism wants is a pure Jewish entity, not in an empty land somewhere, but in the homeland of the Palestinian people in Palestine. But as you know, they've expanded their occupation into Lebanon, expanded it into Syria. They seem intent on realizing the dream of Zionism, the sick dream of greater Israel, not really caring about who lives in these countries or on that land. So I think that's his ultimate aim. How does he achieve that? The Palestinian people haven't left Gaza yet, so he thinks, what's the next level of, if you like, oppressing them that will cause them to leave, as he would then call, either voluntarily or in line with the Trump vision, as they started to call it. The most outrageous thing to come out of the mouth of an American president, I remember hearing, that he thinks this is just a piece of real estate. And yeah, it's been damaged. People can't live in areas that have been destroyed. Well, who destroyed them? Instead of telling the Palestinians that they should leave to third countries, he should be telling Israel to stop the killing and to move out of Gaza.
Yeah, and just lastly, I mean, thinking about what happens after the conflict ends and what happens in the months ahead, I mean, I know the Trump administration wants to expand the Abraham Accords, but I mean, it's very hard to imagine, in the context of what's been happening in Gaza these last 22 months, how any Arab nations are going to be able to even think about normalizing ties with Israel. I mean, at least not for a very long time. What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts always go to the United Arab Emirates first, which did normalize on the basis that Israel would not annex the West Bank. I'm sure you remember, and the viewers will remember, that that was the reason they claimed, the Emirates, that that's why they would normalize, because they had an undertaking from Israel that it would not annex the West Bank. That's happening in full view. The settlers are attacking and killing Palestinians in villages, emptying them out. Smotrich has talked about moving forward with annexation. The Knesset has voted to ask the government to do it. So first of all, even the countries that have relations with Israel should be throwing the ambassadors out. After all, the Palestinian people in Gaza are their brothers and sisters. The Israelis are not. They are the occupiers, even before the 7th of October. So they should be throwing the Israeli ambassadors out, cutting relations, and that's the sort of pressure that is needed for Israel not to go into Gaza. But for as long as it can do what it does, then it will continue. And therefore, if I say that existing Abraham Accords should be cancelled, I would not support any further normalization with Israel from anyone, whether it's Saudi Arabia or Syria or Lebanon, particularly, because I know a lot of the talk is about them.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. A pleasure talking to you, Palestinian academic, Professor Kamel Hawwash. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.